This is the second part of Multicultural Literature video. It's not very long, and it's really a review from the textbook of some major concepts. So all genres contain books from a variety of cultural perspectives, which means it is now possible to make diversity a central tenet of any literature collection. So in the first chapter, Galda et al. Proposed is a typology of sorts, having to do with how to classify certain books with how they portray culture. So the first thing she asks you to do is consider the role of culture in the picture books. What role does culture play? So when evaluating cultural content, some books have characters from a variety of ethnicities or cultures, and often indicate diversity through visual information, such as skin color, eye shape, hair color, and style, or the presence of a wheelchair, but present no cultural content. Galda et al. Refers to these types of books as painted faces books. Books that have characters from a variety of ethnicities, of cultures, and often indicate diversity through visual information such as skin, eye color, eye shape, hair color, and style, or the presence of a wheelchair, present no cultural content, are painted faces books. The example given in the textbook is called The Hello Goodbye Window by Juster and Rascher. And it's actually a winner of a Caldecott medal for illustration. It features an interracial family, but being interracial is not the focus of the book. Culture as such is not an important aspect of the book. But the theme of the strength of the family is enriched by the diversity depicted. So we go back to evaluating cultural content. If the inclusion of culturally diverse characters is gratuitous or stereotyped, select another book. We do not need books that perpetuate stereotypes. Sometimes, however, this kind of diversity subtly reinforces the idea that we live in a culturally diverse world, one populated by people of different colors, people in wheelchairs, people who live in a variety of situations. So just because it's a painted faces book, which has a pejorative connotation in a way, because you think of painted faces, you think of blackface and minstrel shows, but Galda's using it in a different way here. So it doesn't necessarily have that negative connotation. It's saying there's a lack of something, which doesn't mean the book is bad. It's just lacking something. It could be richer. So that's why she's labeling it painted faces. Then there's culture as concept. Culture as concept. Theme or unifying idea is that culture is important, that people are different yet the same, and often both differences and commonalities need to be acknowledged. And in the textbook, she brings up Whoever You Are by Mem Fox as an example. And here's a double-page spread, full bleed, from Whoever You Are. And we see all of the, peoples of different shades and colors waving. And on the other side of the gutter, smiles are the same and hearts are just the same wherever they are, whoever you are, wherever they are. So really putting an emphasis on sameness across color and across culture. Then we literally have children around the world, holding hands, which is definitely a giveaway that culture as concept is probably how you would label this book. It's putting the emphasis on different cultures, on unity, not one culture, not two cultures, but on all cultures being a part of a diverse world. Then we have culturally rich. Depicts the experiences that are explicitly embedded in a particular culture, with setting, plot, and characters inextricably tied to culture. Now, it's not easy to actually pick culturally rich books. Even people of that culture may not understand to what degree a book should reflect the culture of their own. But one good example of a culturally rich book is Show Way by Woodson. A showway is a quilt with secret meanings, and the image works as both history and haunting metaphor in this picture book. Based on Woodson's own history, the unforgettable story tells of African American women across generations, from slavery and civil rights movement to the present. The cutout jacket design is impressive, as it is Tablet's mixed media artwork inside, which extends Woodson's clear poetic narrative and beautiful collages that make use of big triangles, squares, and curves to emphasize portraits and landscapes and show connections and courage. The first double-page spread is the angled separation of Suni's great-grandmother, Suni being the protagonist, is sold without her ma or pa. Growing up on a plantation in South Carolina, Suni learns from Big Mama about children growing up and getting themselves free, and also how to sew quilts with signs that show the way to freedom. Time passes. Suni's grandmother, Georgina, has twins who marched for freedom in the 1960s. The final glorious spread shows Georgina's granddaughter, Jacqueline Woodson, laughing at home with her own beloved daughter, Georgina, whose picture is embedded in a quilt connecting her with those who came before. And it's often shows themes like family roots and the issues of the past and its relevancy to the present. So here's a showway quilt. So ultimately the showway, this story is about ancestry. The author is telling a story about her ancestors to her daughter. She tells her about their past and how they all had their own quote-unquote showway. Every piece of quilt, starting with Suni's great-grandmother, had a significant meaning. When Suni's great-grandmother made the quilts, the pieces signified roads, moons, and stars to follow, a way to escape their slavery. Suni's grandmother was sold into slavery, and she made clothes for everyone in the big house, even the slaves. At night she sewed stars and moons and roads into quilts, each piece a picture signifying what to follow to find the North Star, her own showway. So a showway is a quilt with secret meanings, and the image works as both history and haunting metaphor. And as we can see here, it's showing a path of the quilt, and throughout the entire book you see the motif of these quilts and what these quilts mean. They're stories that are embedded of African Americans escaping slavery through the various generations of Woodson's family. It shows it from slavery to freedom, through segregation, freedom marches, and the fight for literacy. The tradition they called showway has been passed down by the women in Jacqueline Woodson's family as a way to remember the past and celebrate the possibilities of the future. And here again you're seeing the present, but they're still using the motif of the various quilted fabrics in terms of using diagonals, and you're seeing what's going on through the quilt, which is made of the paper. So it's really rich both through story and through illustration. And this is one of the concluding pictures that we see of the granddaughter folding the quilt with the grandmother. Suni's great-grandmother was only 7 when she was sold from her parents in Virginia and sent to South Carolina. All she had was a piece of muslin from her mother, 2 needles, and bright red thread. She was raised by Big Mama, who cared for the plantation. The quilt-making tradition is passed down through successive generations of women and family. Finally, readers meet the narrator, who grew up to become a writer and tell the stories of many people's showways, which is Woodson. A poignant trial at the end of the book shows 8 generations of women and the author's baby painted against the background of quilt patterns. Showway is a sophisticated book that introduces readers to the passage of time, family traditions, and the significance of quilts and patterns in African American history. So here we have the author, who's a very well-known author, Jacqueline Woodson Showay. And so the book is based on her family history, 7 generations of girls and women, quilters, artists, freedom fighters. And one of the motivations she says, for the book was to show a way for her daughter. So that would be considered a culturally rich book. It's focusing very deeply on one particular culture and really digging and deconstructing what that event was and how it carried on through the generations. The art and the text work together in such a way to reinforce the cultural authenticity of that book. So other points on evaluating cultural content: regardless of the role culture plays in a book, the depiction of culture should be accurate, authentic, and free of stereotypes. Good literature portrays what is unique to an individual culture. It accurately portrays the nuances of day-to-day living in the culture depicted. It does not distort or misrepresent the culture it reflects. Most stories are about the experience of an individual character, not necessarily representative of the norm. Barbara Bader states, "It is important, too, to have the cultural details be right, although just what is right is not always easy to determine. People's experiences and understandings of their experiences vary. Cultures are large, and individual within cultures are distinct, even cultures that don't stress individualism. But, however, blatant misinformation and the perpetuation of demeaning stereotypes are one thing. Minor mistakes are another." So, the argument being that not every book is going to be recognized by every person of a certain culture as being culturally rich, because everybody is different. They're all, even if they have an affiliatory group, that doesn't mean that their story can be representative of that entire group. So the argument being made here is there still needs to be a sensitivity that there are individuals within these larger groups, and those individuals all have separate lives, and they're not always going to fit the normatives that are being set within their particular group affiliation. So, evaluating cultural content. Use Galda's typology to classify the following books. So, we're going to be using the typology of Painted Faces, Culture as Concept, and Culturally Rich. And we'll look at books, and then at the end, we'll discuss why they are what they are. But I'll give you time during that time to try to figure it out for yourself first. So first we have the book, What I Like About Me. So we see the first thing we see is the cover of the book, and we see that there's a bunch of kids of all colors and shades wearing glasses with curly hair, straight hair, braces, all surrounding, holding hands around the book. So one of the first pages is a picture happening in a classroom, and it says, "Some kids have teeth that gleam real white with braces. Mine shine twice as bright. Mom says my glasses look distinguished. If I knew what that meant, I'd get an A in English." Our different lunches hit the spot. A burrito, sushi, a curry, that's hot. So we're seeing people of 4 different ethnicities, races, sitting at a table, all eating different kinds of food. The Asian girl has chopsticks in her hands. She's eating some sort of bento box. The Caucasian male sitting next to her is eating a sandwich. It says someone's eating a burrito, but I don't see the burrito. I see a pizza. So, but you guys get the deal. What I like about me. I've had big feet since I was 8. In any shoes, they look just great. And on the other side, there's ballet slippers make me feel pretty. But here's what I've never rather wear on my feet. And that's an opening, so. But we're seeing 2 characters. One's Caucasian, the other's African American or of African descent. and they're both talking about the various activities they're doing. I like my spiky hair. It's great. When the wind blows, it just stays straight. When clouds appear and skies are misty, that's when my hair gets nice and twisty. And then we have a book where it kind of cuts up the text, but it's all about they all have different talents, can't you tell? They all have something that they can do well. They all hold trophies and smile real wide, and all feel good inside. What do you do best? Here's a trophy to celebrate. And then the following screen is it's a reflective. It's supposed to be reflecting you, and says, we are all different, certainly. I'm not like you, you're not like me. That's why we think that life is great. So join us as we celebrate. What is it like best about you? What is it you like best about you? And that's a mirror. So what type of book this is? What type of book can we classify this book? Well, we notice that there's characters of many ethnicities, colors, curly hair, straight hair, eating different food. They're celebrating. So they're celebrating unity. So I would classify it as culture as concept. I think it would definitely fall under culture as concept. But that's certainly something we can discuss in class. And I think it falls under that because it is a celebratory book about unity, and it doesn't get into the culture, it merely displays it and celebrates it. So then we have Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. And this is actually, an extremely important book historically. Keats won the 1963 Caldecott Medal for it. And he was an American writer of Jewish descent. And Snowy Day was actually one of the most important American books in the 20th century. Keats is best known for introducing multiculturalism into mainstream American children's literature. He was one of the first children's books authors to use an urban setting for his stories, and he developed the use of collage as a medium for illustration. So what Keats did was, throughout the book, you see a young boy running around in an urban setting, playing around. He's always wearing red. He's definitely has skin that can be related to African American descent. There's a good picture right there. The thing is, there's nothing in the book that necessarily refers to the boy as being African American. You could simply replace the boy with any other boy of any other heritage, a Hispanic boy, a Caucasian boy. It could be a girl, and it wouldn't make that difference. Wouldn't make that big of a difference of the story. But at the time, there weren't a lot, if at all, depictions of African Americans in picture books for kids. So what Keats did was actually very revolutionary, and he gets credit for that. However, knowing that we could simply replace this boy with a person of any other color, and it lacks real depth of cultural content, where does it fall within the typology we're given in the book? It would fall with painted faces. And that's one of the reasons I have an issue with that term, but we'll use it and we'll discuss it in class. So it would be painted faces. Then we have a biography for children written by Winter about Frida Kahlo. So we see the cover, and we see Frida, a little baby Frida. We see that she has the unibrow right there. And the first thing that I notice is that there's already a bunch of symbolism in here. And the colors that are being used are also of significance because they resonate with much of Frida Kahlo's art. So here's a bunch of pictures from the book. We get an image of Frida Kahlo. Again, she's being put in with the classic unibrow, which we often see in her self-portraits. And the classic hairstyle that comes from her native roots, and a lot of the colors have a vibrancy, are so saturated that it definitely is making a connection to Frida's art. The little characters you see, the sun, all of these things serve as motifs in Frida's own, in Frida's her self-portraits and her art in general. So I would say, just by looking at the pictures alone, I would say this is a very culturally rich book. I think that, especially because of the age group, it's an introduction to Frida, and I think one of the best introductions to Frida is through as much of her artwork as you can possibly get there. Some people might disagree, and we can discuss that in class. Then we have these two books, Same but Different, and We Are All Alike, We Are All Different. So I think this one is relatively easy, since we said culture as concept is exactly what this is acknowledging sameness and difference. So these can, without even opening them, you can kind of put it in that category of culture as concept, because the titles themselves are kind of shouting it. I usually say don't judge a book by its cover, always read it, and I would recommend reading it just to make sure. But if you have to quickly categorize books, the title alone kind of gives it away. We All Sing with the Same Voice. Again, the title alone is kind of giving it away. We all sing with the same voice. On the cover, they're all holding hands, and they're all of different ethnicities and different races. So again, I would say that's culture as concept. Then we have Pa Leah's First Day. And this is two different covers for the book. So on each of them, we see that there's three little faces on the top. And there's Pa Leah, who looks of Asian descent, down below. This book is actually a series, a Jackson Friends book series. And she appears also in The Talent Show, in Zero Parents, and Stinky Stern Forever, along with along with her other stock characters. So it's a series within itself. It works as itself, and it's part of a larger series. So here we get some inside illustrations. We see the title page here, and Pa Leah saying goodbye to her mother, and her mother has a baby on her back, and her brother's pulling her pigtails. And then we see her with glasses and being talked to by her brother, it seems like, and then there's two characters behind her. Then we get more illustrations. We see her, with a friend looking at a bulletin board. There's illustrations on the side of the page of her sitting at her desk. There's an illustration of her walking into a room with various people. But from reading this book, what you'll shortly notice is, other than the fact that her name is Pa Leah, and she has Asian characteristics, there's no other way you would know that she is of Hmong descent, and that's what she is in the book. So due to that, and the fact that you could just plop in another character there and change their name, and they would serve the same function, we might consider this book a painted faces book, because it's very easy to just change Pa Leah into, Kim Smith. So her ethnicity doesn't really play a role at all, really, other than her name in the actual storyline. Then we get to Roswell's Riddle by Erica Silverman. Roswell's Riddle is a Ashkenazi, Polish-based version of Cinderella, but it's very different than the Cinderella that we know. So in the beginning, we get to know about Roswell, and a long time ago, women, especially in Poland, who were Orthodox, Orthodox Jewish, weren't allowed to learn how to read or to read the Talmud. But due to Razel's relationship with the rabbi, he secretly taught her how to read and how to read the Talmud and how to figure out riddles. Unfortunately, this was not appreciated by her mother, who saw all of what she did as being unimportant to her role, which was to clean and to be pretty much her slave. And you can see that her mother is very angry with her. And then one day they hear about Purim and a big Purim festival going on. Now, this Purim festival is what would be in Cinderella the ball, but Purim is a special holiday in the Jewish faith or Jewish heritage. It's a day that it's kind of like Halloween. Everybody dresses up. It's very celebratory. It's one of the it is the most celebratory holiday there is, pretty much. And they dress up, they dance, have a big party. It's like Halloween, but has religious connotations related to it. So this old woman comes up and says, Razel, I know that you're supposed to stay here and rub floors and everything, but you should go to the party and meet with and meet people and see the rabbi and see the rabbi's son. So a little bit of magic happens, and suddenly Razel is in a dress and she has a horse. And she shows up to the party where she does dance with the rabbi's son. And they have an interesting conversation, and he tells her how different she is because she's so smart and she's witty. And then suddenly she has to run. She has to run back before, everything turns to nothing and she looks like a poor maid again. And he's left not knowing who this woman is that he fell in love with. So he decides to search the village, and he goes around searching the village, but he doesn't use the shoe motif. The motif he uses is he comes up with a riddle, and they have to be able to answer the riddle, because due to the level of sophistication and the wit that the woman that he fell in love with had, he is assuming that if they can answer this riddle, then they would of course be the woman he fell in love with. So as it goes, he eventually does find her. He asks her the riddle, and then the rabbi's son, who in Ashkenazi culture at that time in Poland, could be considered a prince, falls in love with this maid, a young woman of small standing in that community. So, and they live happily ever after. So it's very culturally rich in the sense that every part of it fits very well within the Ashkenazi traditions. And even to understand the book, you kind of have to understand the culture. You're not going to really understand what Purim is or its significance if you're not familiar with Jewish heritage or Jewish faith. So, if you're not familiar with how women were treated in that culture, before the 1900s, you're not going to understand how significant it is that she went above and beyond to actually learn to read and to develop her mind and cultivate her wit, which is ultimately what attracted the rabbi's son or the prince to her. So, very culturally rich book. And it's a book that you randomly see around. I randomly see it at bookstores. And I wasn't introduced to it till I was much older. But very culturally rich book. And a lot of folk tales are culturally rich. But the point is, you don't want to stock your library only with folk tales because they're culturally rich. You want to find them elsewhere as well. Then we have these two books. It's Okay to Be Different and Shades of People. So going off what we already know, we're not going to open these books up. What do we immediately start to conclude? When it's celebrating difference and celebrating different shades of people holding hands, we probably are going to go with culture as concept. it doesn't look like from the covers of these books or their titles that they're going to be delving into a specific culture to deconstruct it or to show how it's culturally rich. Again, I never try to judge a book by its cover. You should probably open it up and evaluate it further, but at this point, that's where you would put them. That being said, that doesn't mean these are bad books. It's just, well, some of them are bad, but, and we'll talk about that more, but it's important to just know what kinds of different cultural books you have, and that you have a variety of them. Because even though it's culture's concept, like I earlier said, it still legitimates the identities of diversity and the importance of diversity and unity within a classroom. So that's, and with Painted Faces, even if it's just with Jack Ezra's book Snowy Day, that was the first really popular children's book that featured an African American character. Whether it could have been a white character didn't mean anything. Keats decided to make it a black character, an African American character. So, a sense of legitimization goes there, a sense of being able to be seen. So we'll talk about this more, but it's important to understand that there's a variety of books that can be considered culture, and that it's not always you don't always have to put a bad judgment, like say these are bad books because of this and this and this. These are different books. Bad books are when they stereotype or when they're prejudicial or when they're offensive. So culturally rich books are ideally what you want to have in your library, but you also want to have the other books as well. So in parting, we will talk about this more, and I hope this piques your interest, and if you have any questions, please write them down and we'll talk about them in class.